Shadow of the Erdtree has introduced so many new weapons and spells to the player sandbox, but something they've also added are player transformation items. Some of these can be a bit silly, while others can define your whole build if you let it. With that in mind, we wanted to see how viable we could make a character build that was based on one of the new dragon transformations. Here's our Dragon Cult Priestess build. The Dragon Cult Priestess excels at using Dragon Cult incantations, as her unique transformation item gives her a 20% damage bonus for said incantations. As such, we'll be focusing on a high faith build to complement the faith requirements and scaling that these lightning spells demand. There are two dragon transformation items in the DLC, the Rock Heart and the Priestess Heart, and they both can be found in the Jagged Peak region. We did some experimenting with a Rock Heart Dragon Communion build, and while some of the results were promising, we found that the long cast times and low armor rating that this playstyle requires was pretty underwhelming, so we decided to instead focus on the Priestess Heart item. To acquire it, you need to get a certain ending to the Priestess's quest, who you meet at the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion. To do this, you must defeat Baal the Dread on top of the Jagged Peak, but without giving her Tiolier's concoction first. Once you've defeated Baal, when you return to the altar, the priestess will not be there, and you can pick up her weapon and transformation item. This will lock you out of getting a new Dragon Cult incantation, which she gives you for the other quest ending, meaning that it is impossible to gain both items in one playthrough. To use the Priestess Heart, you must unequip all of your armor first and then use it. Once the transformation is complete, using the heart again will give you a 20% damage boost for all Dragon Cult incantations for 60 seconds, turning the heart into a free and potent damage buff that can stack with other bonuses that are available to us. Dragon Cult incantations are basically all of the lightning spells in the game, so our build seeks to maximize the amount of lightning damage dealt. Many of the major items in this build require you to have progressed a substantial way into the DLC, and as such we've provided the stats for a level 175 character, as opposed to level 150. You can make this build work at a lower level, but you will be missing key items and incants for a time, so keep that in mind if you go to replicate this build from the start of the DLC. The major downside of this transformation is that we'll be working with a lack of damage negation and zero poise, meaning you may find this build to be quite squishy in comparison to others. We'll show you how we address this downside in just a bit. We need a few items from the base game in order to round out this build, starting with the seal. The Gravelstone seal boosts Dragon Cult incantations by 15% inherently, and while it doesn't have as much scaling as something like the Dragon Communion seal, we found it goes toe-to-toe with other seals like this one just fine. You can get the Gravelstone seal in Lane Dell by defeating this Archer Knight in the area beside the manor front door, underneath the Ancient Dragon Corpse. Note that if you have defeated Malekith already, this seal will be unavailable to you on this run. One of the few new Dragon Cult incantations in the DLC is the Knight's Lightning Spear, and it will be our main incant going forward. This spell is very similar to the standard Lightning Spear spell from the base game, except that it comes with extra projectiles for a bit more FP cost. Because it's as fast to cast as a regular Lightning Spear while doing extra damage, Knight's Lightning Spear becomes incredibly enticing to use for fast and long-ranged damage output, both in boss arenas and out in the open world. You can find Knight's Lightning Spear in the Scorpion River Catacombs in the north of Rao Base. You can reach this area by going through the caves to the north of Morth Ruins in Skardu Altus. Once in the catacombs, you'll need to contend with these Deathblight statues. Follow the main path until you climb a ladder out of the first room with ceiling spike traps. Once you come across a bridge guarded by another Deathblight statue, cross towards the statue by using the ledge along the far wall, then enter the room that it was guarding, defeat the enemies, and grab your new spell. Defeating the boss of this dungeon will reward you with another piece of equipment for our build, the Death Knight's Long-Haft Axe. This weapon scales with faith just like our seal, and also has innate lightning damage, meaning any lightning damage boosting we use will empower our weapon as well as our spells. Now, we need to fill out our repertoire of incantations so we have answers to every situation. The Dragon Cult prayer book is given to you by defeating this Lane Dell Knight in Leonia, just to the south of Artist's Shack. We'll also need the Ancient Dragon Prayer Book, which you find much later in Farum Azula, in the center of the main room that looks out onto the Tempest-facing balcony Site of Grace. Hand both of these books into an incantation vendor, like Miriel in the Church of Vows, and you can then buy the Lightning Spear, Ancient Dragon's Lightning Spear, and Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike incants. We'll also be using Golden Vow to buff our attack and defense, which you can find in Corpse Stench Shack along the road to Volcano Manor in Mount Gelmir. We're going to grab the Lightning Shrouded Crack tier for our Physic Flask, which you get by defeating the Erdtree avatar here in northeastern Leonia. Finally, for our talismans, we need to find a few usual suspects. The Radagon icon will help to shorten cast times, which is great for almost any spellcasting build. You can find this by taking the ladder to the top of the debate parlor in Raya Lucaria Academy. The Godfrey icon boosts our damage when we fully charge our spells, which we'll be doing frequently. You earn this by defeating Godfroy in the Golden Lineage Everjail in Altus Plateau, right next to the Grand Lift of Dectus. The Lightning Scorpion charm will increase our lightning damage, and you can find it in Wyndham Catacombs in the Altus Plateau, behind a Stone Sword Key fog wall. And lastly, to increase our survivability, we're using the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, which you can find in Althale in the upper story of the church above the Melania fight. Putting it all together, we've got the Death Knight Long-Hafted Axe in our right hand, and the Gravelstone Seal in the left, both upgraded to the maximum, or one level under if you're saving your ancient smithing stones. Our armor is empty to enable the transformation, and our talismans are Radagon Icon, Godfrey Icon, Lightning Scorpion Charm, and Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. If you want a more glass cannon build, you can try swapping the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman for the Faithful or Phlox Canvas Talismans for a further damage increase, but this option is not for the faint of heart. You'll take a lot of damage this way. In our equipment, we've got our Priestess Heart item for transforming and boosting our damage, and in our Flask of Wondrous Physic, we're using our Lightning Shrouded Crack tier to increase our lightning damage for 3 minutes. For the second slot, you can use either the Cerulean Hidden tier for some free spellcasts, or the Faith Knot Crystal tier for a burst of faith scaling damage. Entering the stat screen now, and we start with 50 Vigor, 30 Mind, and 20 Endurance. 50 is the lowest we would go for Vigor, considering how little damage negation you have in your dragon form. Likewise, 30 is the lowest we would go for Mind, as we found that we were frequently running out of FP during fights. Next, we want to increase our Faith up to 70. While we are getting diminishing returns for higher levels in Faith, we did notice a difference in damage output by increasing our Faith from 60 to 70, and honestly, we think it's worth the investment. From here, we got our Dexterity to 20 to keep our options open for wielding different weapons, and to slightly increase our casting speed. Your remaining points can get your Strength to 23 to meet the Axe strength requirements. Incidentally, if you are level 150, you can use an early version of this build in its current form. From here, to get to 175, you can keep leveling Strength for more melee damage, or you may want to consider using any extra levels for Vigor or Mind if you're finding that either resource is lacking. Also, you may have noticed our character was a bit overleveled here, so to simulate a level 175 character, we dumped our excess levels into Intelligence, as this had a negligible effect on our build. To get the maximum damage output out of this build, you'll need to use your Dragon Transformation twice to gain the Dragon Cult damage buff. Then, drink your Physic Flask for a lightning damage boost. Next, use Golden Vow to increase your defense and attack potency. Your Gravelstone Seal, Godfrey Icon, and Lightning Scorpion Charm will also contribute to increased damage output with your lightning spells if they're charged, which can let you do huge amounts of damage while all of your buffs are active. If you're in a fight that's lasting a while and some of your buffs run out, it will be tricky to reactivate them all once again, as both Golden Vow and the Priestess Heart buff take a while to cast. But hey, you get the benefit of looking like you're taunting your foe when you use the Priestess buff, almost like you're playing Super Smash Bros., so that's pretty fun. Knight's Lightning Spear is your go-to spell for boss fights, as the quick cast is plenty powerful, and charging it fully allows you to not only deal increased damage thanks to Godfrey Icon, but you can also potentially stun the enemy after 2 or 3 consecutive charged hits. Another benefit of this spell is that if you are knocked out of the cast before you throw the main bolt, if your other projectiles have been cast, then they will still fire, and they do the majority of the damage with each casting, meaning you won't be giving up your health for nothing. The original Lightning Spear spell, while not quite as useful as its more powerful counterpart, is still good to have on hand to help take out smaller, weaker enemies, which will in turn help you to manage your FP consumption when Knight's Lightning Spear is a bit overkill. The long-hafted axe serves the same function, as it does plenty of damage to rank and file enemies, but doesn't quite stack up to the fully boosted Dragon Cult incant damage in a boss fight. Ancient Dragon Lightning Spear strikes the ground with about as much strength as Knight's Lightning Spear, which is great for hitting multiple close enemies at once with one casting. And Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike is amazing at dealing an oppressive amount of damage in a wide area. It strikes many times in a zone around you when used, but it can be a bit inconsistent as to whether many of the strikes land or not. That said, using this spell on enemies with large hitboxes is sure to deal massive damage, as each strike hits hard and these bosses can be hit multiple times. You can use any other Dragon Cult incantation here to enjoy the build's bonus effects, like Frozen Lightning Spear or Fortisax's Lightning Spear, so play around with them all to see what you enjoy best. The biggest danger with this build is not only that you take a lot of damage from attacks, but also that you have zero poise, meaning you're likely to get stun-locked by multi-hit combo attacks if just one strike connects. Because of this, you may find that learning new fights is difficult with this setup, as your mistakes will be severely punished, but it is possible to progress once you get the patterns down, as is the case for most FromSoft bosses. You'll just be working with a bit less leeway than you might be with a full armor set equipped. If you're hoping to use other weapons or equipment for this style of build, by all means try some things out. Any faith scaling will do you well, but here's one particular standout we needed to mention, the Fire Knight's Greatsword, which you can find off the bodies of great sword-wielding Fire Knights in Shadow Keep. This sword scales well with Faith and hits like an absolute truck, but something that makes it unique compared to the Death Knight weapons is that it can be buffed with armament incantations. By using this sword with a spell like Fyke's Dragon Bolt, you can imbue the weapon with lightning damage for 70 seconds, improving this sword's already impressive damage output by a substantial margin, and allowing it to piggyback off of our already active lightning damage buffs. When we were choosing between this sword and the long-hafted axe, to be honest it was a bit of a coin toss, so if you're interested we recommend trying both weapons to see which one you prefer the most. It takes a while for this build to come together, but once it does, you can take on bosses like Malekith, Malenia, and DLC bosses too with draconic flair. For more on Elden Ring, check out our growing wiki for plenty of other build guides, as well as interactive maps, boss guides, walkthroughs, and more. And for all other things Elden Ring and gaming, stick with IGN.